Black man arrested without cause, but when police learn his true identity, they're speechless. On a quiet Monday afternoon, in the middle of a bustling suburban neighborhood, a police cruiser slowed to a stop in front of a small corner café. Inside, a man sat alone at a table, sipping his coffee, his eyes scanning a book in his hands. To anyone passing by, he appeared ordinary, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark jeans, his demeanor calm and composed. But outside, the officers in the cruiser exchanged glances, their suspicion growing. One of them reached for the radio. The man, later identified as Marcus Gray, seemed unaware of the attention he was drawing. He adjusted his glasses, flipped a page, and sipped his coffee again. However, to the officers, something about Marcus felt off. It wasn't his behavior or even anything he had done. It was simply a gut feeling, fueled perhaps by the recent spike in patrols around the area. Without any clear reason, the officers decided to approach him. As they entered the cafe, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations among the patrons quieted, and an awkward tension filled the air. Marcus noticed the officers right away but continued reading, his posture unchanged. When one of them cleared his throat and asked to speak with him, Marcus calmly closed his book and looked up. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely, his voice steady. "We've had some reports about suspicious activity in the area," one officer said. "Can we see some identification?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, but without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet and handed them his ID. The officer studied it carefully. Still, their unease didn't wane. One of them stepped aside to radio in a background check while the other stood, keeping his eyes locked on Marcus. The other patrons in the cafe began whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. One woman leaned over to a friend and murmured, "He didn't do anything. He was just sitting there." Marcus, noticing the attention, sighed softly. "Am I being accused of something?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. The officer hesitated. "We're just following up on a report. It's standard procedure." Moments later, the radio crackled. The background check came back clean, but the officers weren't satisfied. They asked Marcus to step outside. Reluctantly, he agreed, grabbing his belongings and following them to the sidewalk. By now, a small crowd had gathered near the cafe, curiosity and concern etched on their faces. Standing outside, Marcus turned to one of the officers. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked. But before he could get an answer, one officer suddenly moved to cuff him. "You're under arrest," the officer said, his voice steady but devoid of explanation. "For what?" Marcus asked, his voice rising slightly in disbelief. "Resisting investigation," came the vague reply. Marcus didn't resist physically, but his frustration was evident. "This is absurd," he said as the cuffs tightened around his wrists. The crowd began to murmur louder, their phones capturing every second of the scene. A few voices in the crowd shouted, "He didn't do anything. And this is wrong." But the officer seemed unmoved, guiding Marcus toward the cruiser. As they drove off, Marcus sat silently in the back seat, his expression unreadable. At the station, things took an unexpected turn. When the officers ran a more thorough check on his identity, their faces turned pale. Marcus wasn't just anyone. His name and credentials opened a floodgate of information that left them stunned. Who was Marcus Gray? And why did his true identity leave even the police speechless? Stay tuned for the full story, it's one you won't forget. As Marcus sat in the dimly lit holding cell, the weight of the situation began to sink in. The initial calm he had displayed during his arrest now gave way to a mixture of anger and frustration. He replayed the events in his mind, trying to pinpoint what had gone wrong. But no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't understand why the officers had singled him out. The cold metal of the handcuffs had left red marks on his wrists, a stark reminder of the injustice he had just endured. At the front desk of the police station, chaos was brewing. One of the officers who had arrested Marcus stared at the screen of his computer, his brow furrowed deeply. "This can't be right," he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. He called over another officer, who leaned in to read the information displayed. As the seconds ticked by, their expressions shifted from confusion to shock. The officer who had initiated the arrest, Officer Miller, ran a hand through his hair. "Do you know who this guy is?" he asked his partner, his voice barely above a whisper. His partner shook his head, still staring at the screen as if trying to process the data in front of him. "He's a federal attorney," Miller said, his words heavy with realization. "And not just any attorney. This guy's handled some of the biggest civil rights cases in the country." His partner looked up, his face pale. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," Miller replied, the regret evident in his tone. He's been on national news. He's defended wrongfully accused individuals. The man's practically untouchable. As the officers grappled with their mistake, word of Marcus's identity began to spread throughout the station. A few officers exchanged uneasy glances, while others whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One officer approached the desk sergeant and asked, "What's the protocol for when we mess up this badly?" The sergeant let out a long sigh. "Damage control," he said, rubbing his temples. "We need to fix this before it becomes a PR nightmare." Meanwhile, Marcus remained seated in the holding cell. His expression calm but his mind racing. He had seen situations like this play out before, but always from the other side of the table. Never in a million years had he imagined he'd become the subject of such a blatant miscarriage of justice. Suddenly, the door to the holding area opened, and Officer Miller stepped inside. His demeanor was noticeably different, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes avoiding Marcus's gaze. "Mr. Gray," Miller began, his voice tight with tension, "we need to have a word with you." Marcus stood, his expression unreadable. "About time," he said, following the officer out of the cell. He was led into a small interrogation room where two senior officers were waiting. They introduced themselves, their tone overly polite, as though they were speaking to a superior rather than someone they had just wrongfully detained. Marcus sat across from them, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, silently demanding an explanation. One of the senior officers cleared his throat. "Mr. Gray, let me start by saying this was a misunderstanding. We had reports of suspicious activity in the area, and," Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. "Suspicious activity? I was drinking coffee and reading a book. Explain to me how that qualifies as suspicious." The officer hesitated, clearly unprepared for Marcus's straightforward challenge. "We acted on incomplete information," he said finally, though his words lacked conviction. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let's not dance around this. I was profiled, wasn't I? And instead of admitting you made a mistake, you arrested me without cause." The second senior officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We understand how this must look, Mr. Gray. And we deeply regret the error." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He let the silence hang in the air, the weight of their actions pressing down on everyone in the room. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured but firm. "Regret doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't erase the humiliation, the unnecessary force, or the fact that you've reinforced the very stereotypes I've spent my career fighting against." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing there was no easy way out of this. Marcus's calm yet commanding presence made it clear he wasn't going to let this slide. As the meeting continued, word of the situation began to leak outside the station. Videos of Marcus's arrest, recorded by bystanders at the café, had already started to gain traction online. The hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #ProfilingExposed began trending, drawing attention from activists, journalists, and the general public. Back in the interrogation room, Marcus stood up abruptly, cutting the conversation short. "I don't need an apology," he said, his voice steady. "I need accountability. And trust me, I'll make sure this doesn't end here." With that, he walked out of the room, leaving the officers in stunned silence. Jenna could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. For what obvious tea, but as he exited the station, his phone buzzed in his pocket. When he checked the screen, he saw dozens of missed calls and messages. The world was already watching, and the truth about what had happened was spreading like wildfire. What Marcus did next would not only shake the local police department but spark a nationwide conversation about justice, accountability, and the power of standing up against injustice. And as the spotlight turned toward him, it became clear that Marcus Gray wasn't just a victim, he was about to become a symbol of change. The ride home was quiet, but the tension in Marcus's chest didn't ease. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping his phone tightly. The notifications hadn't stopped since he left the station, texts from colleagues, voicemails from reporters, and even a few messages from strangers who had somehow already tracked down his contact information. He hadn't responded to any of them yet. Right now, his focus was on processing the weight of what had happened and planning his next move. When he pulled into the driveway of his modest two-story home, Marcus sat in the car for a moment, staring blankly at the dashboard. His mind raced through fragments of the day, the café, the officers, the cold, accusing glares, and the suffocating tightness of the handcuffs. No matter how composed he had appeared outwardly, the experience had shaken him deeply. It wasn't just the humiliation, it was the undeniable realization that even someone like him, A respected attorney with a spotless record could be reduced to a mere suspicious figure in an instant. Inside the house, the smell of fresh coffee lingered, a stark contrast to the sour taste the day had left in his mouth. His wife, Jenna, greeted him in the hallway, her face etched with concern. She had heard about the arrest before he even had the chance to call her, thanks to the viral videos circulating online. Jenna was a journalist, sharp and unyielding, and Marcus could already see the wheels turning in her head. "Marcus," she began, her voice soft but urgent. "What happened? Are you okay?" He set his keys on the table and let out a long sigh. "They arrested me for no reason," he said bluntly. "Claimed I was resisting investigation." His tone was measured. "But Gation?" she pressed, crossing her arms. "You were drinking coffee, for crying out loud." Marcus shook his head, pacing the length of the living room. "They didn't have an answer. They didn't even have probable cause. They just decided I looked out of place." He stopped and turned to face her. "And when they realized who I was, they panicked. Tried to smooth it over with empty apologies." Jenna's eyes narrowed, and Marcus could tell she was already thinking about the broader implications. "This is bigger than just today," she said. "This isn't just about you, it's about everyone who doesn't have the resources or the voice to fight back." "I know," Marcus replied quietly. He sank onto the couch, running a hand over his face. "I've spent my career fighting for those people. And now I'm living proof of exactly what they go through." The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. Jenna eventually broke the quiet. "What's the next step? Are you going to file a formal complaint?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I have to. But it's not just about the complaint. This isn't something we can let fade into the background. People need to know that this happens, even to someone like me." Jenna's lips pressed into a thin line, her determination evident. "Then we make sure they know. You tell your story. And I'll make sure it gets heard." That night, Marcus began drafting a detailed account of the day's events. His hands moved steadily over the keyboard as he wrote down every interaction, every word exchanged, and every moment of doubt or fear he had felt. The process was cathartic, but it also fueled his resolve. He wasn't just writing for himself, he was writing for the countless others who had been silenced, dismissed, or ignored. As the hours passed, Marcus delved deeper into his memories, not just of the arrest but of the countless instances throughout his life where he had been judged or underestimated because of the color of his skin. He thought about the time in law school when a professor had questioned whether he had written his own paper, despite its brilliance. He thought about the client who had hesitated to hire him until they learned about his impressive win record. And now, he thought about the officers who had seen him sitting in a cafe and decided, without any evidence, that he must be up to no good. By the time he finished writing, it was well past midnight. Marcus leaned back in his chair and stared at the glowing screen, his eyes tired but his mind buzzing with ideas. Jenna walked in with a cup of tea, her expression softening when she saw the look of determination on his face. "Got it all down?" she asked, setting the tea on the desk. "Every detail," he replied. "Now it's just a matter of what to do with it." Jenna smiled faintly. "You've always known what to do, Marcus. This is no different." But deep down, Marcus knew this time was different. The stakes felt higher, the consequences more far-reaching. He wasn't just an attorney fighting for justice, he was now part of the very narrative he had spent years trying to change. The next morning, Marcus woke to a flood of new messages. His email inbox was overflowing, and his phone was buzzing with calls and texts. The videos of his arrest had gained millions of views overnight, sparking outrage and debate across social media. Prominent figures were weighing in, with some condemning the police's actions and others questioning whether there was more to the story. The polarization didn't surprise Marcus, but it reminded him just how much work still needed to be done. One message stood out among the rest. It was from an old colleague, Sam, who had worked with Marcus on several high-profile cases. The message was short but clear: "We need to talk. Call me ASAP." Marcus stepped outside, the morning air crisp and cool, and dialed Sam's number. The phone rang twice before Sam picked up. "Marcus," Sam said, his tone urgent. "I saw the videos. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of weariness. "It's been a lot." "I can imagine," Sam said. "Listen, I've been thinking. This could be a turning point, not just for you but for the broader fight against systemic bias. If you're willing, I think we can use this to push for real change." "I'm willing," Marcus said without hesitation. "But I want to make sure this doesn't just become another viral moment that fades away. It needs to lead to something tangible. That's why I'm calling," Sam said. "I've got some ideas. But first, I need you to know that this won't be easy. The backlash is going to be intense. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus took a deep breath. He thought about the years of hard work, the sacrifices, and the unshakable belief that justice was worth fighting for. "I've never been more prepared," he said. As the call ended, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but he was ready. This wasn't just his fight, it was a fight for everyone who had ever been judged, dismissed, or silenced. And Marcus Gray wasn't about to back down. Over the next few days, Marcus's life transformed into a whirlwind of attention and action. Every major news outlet wanted an interview, and his name was trending on social media alongside hashtags demanding accountability. Jenna worked tirelessly by his side, helping him sift through requests and advising him on how to share his story effectively without losing sight of the bigger picture. Still, amid all the activity, Marcus found himself struggling with a deep sense of unease. He wasn't used to being in the public eye this way. As a lawyer, he'd always worked behind the scenes, letting his clients take center stage while he guided them through the complexities of their cases. Now, the spotlight was on him, and every word he said was being analyzed, debated, and dissected. It was during one of those quiet moments, late at night when Jenna had already gone to bed, that Marcus's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at the screen and saw it was from an unknown number. The message read, "You're making a lot of noise. Be careful who you're up against." For a moment, Marcus just stared at the text, a chill running down his spine. He debated whether to respond, but something told him it was better to ignore it. Instead, he screenshot the message and forwarded it to Jenna with a brief note, "We might need to tighten security." Then he turned his phone off and went to bed, trying not to let his mind spiral into paranoia. The next morning, Marcus shared the message with Sam during a call. Sam wasn't surprised. "You're challenging a system that doesn't like to be challenged," he said matter-of-factly. "The pushback is inevitable. But we've faced this before, and we'll face it again." "Yeah, but it's different when it's personal," Marcus replied. "I'm used to fighting for other people. Now it feels like the fight is following me home." Sam was silent for a moment before responding. "That's how you know you're hitting a nerve. Stay the course, Marcus. You're doing the right thing." Later that day, Marcus decided it was time to go public in a more formal way. He scheduled a press conference outside the police station, ensuring that the setting would serve as a powerful backdrop for his message. Jenna helped him prepare his statement, urging him to focus not just on his personal experience but on the broader issues it represented. When the day arrived, the area outside the station was packed. Journalists with cameras and microphones jostled for position, while a growing crowd of supporters held signs with messages like "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling." Marcus stood at a small podium, his demeanor calm but resolute. He took a moment to scan the crowd before beginning. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he started, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows individuals to be judged, detained, and humiliated based on nothing more than their appearance." He went on to recount the events of that fateful day at the café, his words clear and deliberate. He described the moment he realized he was being profiled, the confusion and anger he felt when he was arrested without cause, and the disbelief that followed when he learned the officers hadn't even known who he was. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued, his voice rising slightly. "It shouldn't matter who I am. Whether I'm a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, or unemployed, I deserve the same respect and dignity as anyone else. We all do. And that's why I'm standing here today, to demand change, not just for myself but for everyone who has ever been treated as less than because of the way they look." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus took a moment to let the noise settle before delivering his final words. "This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Together, we can push for accountability, for transparency, and for a future where no one has to experience what I did." "Thank you." As Marcus stepped away from the podium, reporters shouted questions, but he didn't respond. Instead, he walked toward Jenna, who was waiting nearby with a proud smile. "You nailed it," she said, squeezing his hand. The press conference was just the start. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and his team worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. He appeared on talk shows, participated in panel discussions, and even met with lawmakers to discuss potential reforms. Each step felt like progress, but it also came with its own set of challenges. The hate mail increased, and so did the anonymous threats. Jenna insisted on hiring private security, a precaution Marcus reluctantly agreed to. Through it all, Marcus stayed focused on the bigger picture. He knew the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but he also knew that change was never easy. And if his story could shine a light on the flaws in the system, then every uncomfortable moment would be worth it. One evening, as Marcus sat in his home office reviewing notes for an upcoming panel, Jenna walked in with a folder in her hands. "You need to see this," she said, her tone serious. Marcus took the folder and opened it, his brow furrowing as he read the documents inside. They detailed internal emails from the police department, leaked anonymously, that revealed just how deeply the profiling issue ran. The emails discussed quotas for stops in high-risk areas and included thinly veiled language that disproportionately targeted people of color. "This is it," Jenna said. "This is the smoking gun." Marcus set the folder down, his mind racing. This was bigger than just his case, it was proof of systemic bias at an institutional level. He knew what had to be done. But as he prepared to take the next step, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was about to get even more intense. Marcus sat at his desk, the leaked documents spread out before him like pieces of a puzzle that painted a damning picture. The more he read, the heavier the weight on his chest became. The emails revealed a chilling level of indifference, even outright hostility, toward the very communities the police were supposed to serve. Words like containment zones and undesirable elements jumped off the page, their meaning unmistakable. This wasn't just a problem with a few officers, it was a culture deeply ingrained in the department. Jenna leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a mix of concern and admiration. "This changes everything," she said softly. "You have to go public with it." Marcus rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into his face. "I know. But I need to be smart about how I do it. If I just throw this out there without a plan, it could get buried, or worse, discredited." Jenna nodded, her journalist instincts kicking in. "We need to establish its credibility first. Cross-reference the language in these emails with actual incidents, build a timeline. If we can show a pattern, they can't just dismiss it as isolated." As they worked late into the night, another layer of the story began to unfold. One email in particular caught Marcus's attention. It mentioned a special task force operating in his city, one with vague objectives and even vaguer oversight. The email referred to the task force's success in keeping certain neighborhoods manageable but didn't elaborate on what that meant. Marcus's gut told him this was worth digging into, but he also knew it was a rabbit hole that could lead to even more dangerous territory. Meanwhile, outside their home, the world was shifting. The leaked documents had already begun to circulate online, shared anonymously by the same source who had sent them to Marcus. Public outrage was mounting, and the city was abuzz with protests and calls for accountability. People were gathering outside the police station, demanding answers, while local leaders scrambled to control the narrative. The mayor issued a carefully worded statement, promising an independent investigation, but Marcus knew how those often ended, with no real consequences. One of the most unexpected twists came from within the police department itself. Marcus received an encrypted email from someone claiming to be an officer on the force. The message was brief but intriguing. "Not everyone in the department agrees with what's happening. Some of us want to help. If you're willing to listen, I can give you more." At first, Marcus was wary. This could easily be a trap, a way to discredit him or lure him into saying something that could be used against him. But Jenna, ever the strategist, saw it as an opportunity. "If this person is genuine, they could be the key to proving how deep this goes," she said. "We just have to be careful." They arranged a meeting in a neutral, public location, a small diner on the outskirts of the city. Marcus and Jenna arrived early, taking a seat near the back where they could see the entrance. The tension in the air was palpable as they waited, each glance at the door a reminder of how high the stakes had become. When the officer finally arrived, Marcus was struck by how ordinary he looked, just a man in his mid-30s with tired eyes and a nervous energy. He introduced himself as Officer Daniels and quickly got to the point. "I've been on the force for 10 years, Daniels said, his voice low. "I joined because I wanted to help people. But what I've seen lately, it's not what I signed up for." He went on to describe the inner workings of the department, confirming many of the suspicions Marcus had developed while reading the emails. Daniels spoke of unspoken quotas, where officers were pressured to meet certain numbers by the end of their shifts, even if it meant targeting innocent people. He explained how certain neighborhoods were treated as training grounds for rookies, with little regard for the harm caused to the residents. But what struck Marcus the most was Daniels's account of the task force mentioned in the emails. According to him, it operated almost like a shadow unit, with its own chain of command and objectives that were never fully explained to the rank-and-file officers. "They don't answer to anyone," Daniels said. "Not the chief, not the mayor. They just do what they want." As Daniels spoke, Marcus felt a mix of anger and determination. This was exactly the kind of inside perspective he needed to expose the system for what it was. But it also raised new questions. Who was behind this task force? And what were they trying to achieve? After the meeting, Marcus and Jenna sat in the car, digesting everything they had learned. "This is bigger than I thought," Marcus admitted. "If what Daniels says is true, this isn't just about racial profiling. It's about unchecked power." Jenna nodded, her expression grim. "And if they're willing to go this far, they won't hesitate to come after us to protect themselves." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the risks they were taking. But neither of them wavered. They knew the fight was just beginning, and the road ahead would only get more treacherous. As they drove home, Marcus's phone buzzed with another message, this one from a number he recognized. It was Sam, and the text was brief: "We need to talk. Call me as soon as you can." The cryptic message sent a jolt of unease through Marcus. He glanced at Jenna, who gave him a reassuring nod. Whatever was coming next, they would face it together. But as the car turned onto their quiet street, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the conflict was about to escalate in ways he couldn't yet predict. The unease that had settled over Marcus grew heavier as they pulled into their driveway. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of the porch light. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his hand lingering on the car door handle. Jenna noticed and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We'll get through this," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Marcus nodded, exhaling slowly before stepping out of the car. As they made their way inside, the weight of the day seemed to follow them, lingering in every shadowed corner. Jenna locked the door behind them, double-checking the deadbolt out of an abundance of caution. Marcus immediately dialed Sam, pacing the living room as the call connected. When Sam answered, his tone was unusually serious. "I just got off a call with someone high up," Sam began without preamble. "They're scrambling, Marcus. The leaked documents have them in full damage control mode, and they're looking for a scapegoat. You need to be careful. They'll try to discredit you." Marcus frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "What do you mean? How could they discredit me? The documents speak for themselves." Sam hesitated before responding. "They're digging into your past, your cases, your personal life, everything. If they find even a shred of something they can spin, they'll use it. And if they can't find anything, they'll make something up." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had always kept his personal and professional lives above reproach, but the idea of being targeted with fabricated accusations was unsettling. He thanked Sam for the warning and promised to stay vigilant. After hanging up, Marcus shared the conversation with Jenna. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. "They're getting desperate," she said finally. "That means we're getting close to something big. But it also means we need to be smarter than ever." They decided to double down on their preparations. Jenna reached out to trusted journalists she had worked with in the past, sharing carefully vetted portions of the leaked documents to ensure the story would continue to spread, even if Marcus became the target of a smear campaign. Meanwhile, Marcus began compiling his own evidence, every interaction, every threat, every odd occurrence, documenting it meticulously in case he needed to defend himself. The next morning, Marcus woke to a flood of notifications on his phone. His name was trending again, but this time, the headlines were different. Accusations of misconduct during one of his past cases had surfaced, with anonymous sources claiming he had manipulated evidence to win. Marcus's heart sank as he read through the articles, each one painting him as a lawyer willing to bend the rules for personal gain. "This is it," he muttered, showing Jenna his phone. "This is their play." Jenna scanned the articles, her jaw tightening. "We knew this was coming. They're trying to muddy the waters, make people question your credibility. But we can fight this." Marcus nodded, though a part of him couldn't help but feel the weight of the accusations. Even if they were baseless, the damage to his reputation could be lasting. Still, he refused to let it derail their efforts. Later that day, he held another press conference, addressing the accusations head-on. Standing in front of a crowd of reporters and supporters, Marcus spoke with conviction. "These claims are false, and they are a distraction," he said. "They are an attempt to shift the focus away from the real issue, a broken system that needs to be held accountable. I won't be intimidated, and I won't be silenced. The truth will prevail." The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus could see the reporters' pens flying, their questions already forming. He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the shouted queries, and made his way back to Jenna. "We have to keep the pressure on," he said, his resolve hardening. Over the next few days, new developments emerged. each one adding to the growing complexity of the situation. Officer Daniels contacted Marcus again, this time with more detailed information about the task force. He provided names, dates, and locations of operations that had targeted specific communities under the guise of maintaining order. Marcus cross-referenced the information with the leaked documents, uncovering a pattern that was impossible to ignore. But just as they were preparing to go public with the new evidence, another twist emerged. Marcus received an anonymous email containing a single video file. He opened it cautiously, his stomach knotting as the footage played. It showed a meeting in a dimly lit room, several men in suits discussing strategies to manage the fallout from the leaked documents. One of them mentioned Marcus by name, suggesting that eliminating the source might be the simplest solution. Jenna, who had been watching over his shoulder, gasped. This is a direct threat." Marcus's mind raced. The video was proof of a deliberate effort to silence him, but it also put him in even greater danger. He knew he had to act quickly, but every move felt like stepping deeper into a minefield. That night, as Marcus and Jenna discussed their next steps, their home phone rang, a rarity these days. Marcus hesitated before answering, his voice cautious. "Hello?" A deep, unfamiliar voice responded. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Carter. Walk away while you still can." The line went dead, leaving Marcus gripping the receiver, his pulse pounding. He set the phone down and turned to Jenna, his expression grim. "They're not just trying to discredit me," he said quietly. "They're trying to scare me off the case entirely." Jenna's eyes narrowed, her determination evident. "Then we'll show them we're not afraid. We've come too far to back down now." As the night stretched on, Marcus and Jenna prepared for the next battle, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. The truth was within reach, but so were those who would stop at nothing to bury it. The following days felt like a race against an unseen clock. Marcus and Jenna moved with a sense of urgency, knowing they had to act before the forces working against them could strike again. The anonymous threats kept coming, each more unsettling than the last, but they only seemed to fuel Marcus's determination. Every email, every phone call, every shadow that lingered too long in their periphery was a reminder of the stakes. Still, they pressed on, driven by the weight of the truth they were uncovering. Marcus's meetings with Officer Daniels became more frequent and more secretive. Daniels revealed a troubling detail about the Shadow Task Force. Their operations weren't just about control. They were about silencing dissent in the most brutal and covert ways possible. People who had once spoken out against the force had vanished, their disappearances dismissed as unrelated incidents. Daniels shared names, addresses, and chilling first-hand accounts from other officers who had turned a blind eye for fear of losing their careers, or worse, their lives. Jenna worked tirelessly behind the scenes, connecting dots and reaching out to allies who could help amplify their findings. One of those allies was a prominent civil rights lawyer named Eliza Navarro, known for taking on cases that no one else would touch. When Marcus and Jenna presented her with the evidence they had gathered, Eliza didn't hesitate. She immediately agreed to join their fight, bringing with her a team of seasoned investigators and a network of journalists eager to expose the corruption. Despite the growing coalition, the threats escalated. Late one evening, while Marcus was reviewing case files in his home office, the power suddenly cut out. The house plunged into darkness, the hum of the appliances replaced by an oppressive silence. Jenna called out from the living room, her voice tinged with worry. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and made his way to her, the beam cutting through the shadows as they checked the windows and doors. Outside, the street was eerily quiet, the usual glow of porch lights conspicuously absent. Before they could process what was happening, a car sped past their house, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces. Something small and metallic clattered onto the front porch before the car disappeared into the night. Marcus's heart raced as he opened the door, shining his flashlight on the object, a broken padlock, its jagged edges glinting ominously. He didn't need to say anything. Jenna's expression mirrored his own fear. The message was clear, their home wasn't as safe as they thought. The next morning, Marcus filed a police report about the incident, though he knew it would likely go nowhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone within the department itself was orchestrating the harassment. It only made him more resolved to expose the truth. He began sleeping less, working longer hours, and pushing harder to get the story out. Jenna worried about his health, but she knew better than to try to stop him. They were in this together, and she shared his relentless drive. Meanwhile, Eliza and her team uncovered something even more explosive, a direct link between the Shadow Task Force and several high-profile disappearances that had been dismissed as accidents or suicides. The evidence pointed to a coordinated effort to eliminate perceived threats, with the task force acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Eliza cautioned Marcus to proceed carefully, warning that what they had now wasn't just a scandal, it was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power. As word of Marcus's investigation spread, public support began to swell. Protests grew larger, more organized, and more vocal. People from all walks of life came forward, sharing their own stories of harassment and injustice. For the first time, it felt like the tide was beginning to turn. But with that shift came an even greater sense of danger. One night, as Marcus was driving back from a late meeting with Eliza, he noticed a car following him. At first, he thought it might just be a coincidence, but every turn he made was mirrored by the vehicle behind him. His hands tightened on the wheel as he tried to shake the tail, taking a series of random turns through unfamiliar neighborhoods. The car stayed with him, its headlights glaring in his rearview mirror. Marcus's pulse quickened as he weighed his options. He couldn't lead them back to his home, where Jenna was waiting. Instead, he decided to head to a well-lit gas station, hoping the presence of cameras and other people would deter whoever was following him. As he pulled into the lot, the car slowed but didn't stop, continuing down the road and disappearing into the night. Marcus exhaled, his grip on the wheel loosening slightly, but the encounter left him rattled. When he finally made it home, Jenna was waiting at the door, her worry evident. Marcus didn't want to alarm her, but he couldn't keep the incident to himself. As he recounted what had happened, Jenna's expression hardened. "They're trying to scare you off," she said firmly. "But it won't work. We're too close." The tension between them and their unseen adversaries was at an all-time high. Every move felt like a gamble, every decision fraught with risk. But as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Marcus knew they were nearing the climax of their fight. The truth was within reach, and with it came the promise of justice, or the danger of retaliation that could shatter everything they had worked for. The pressure around Marcus and Jenna seemed to tighten like a noose, but retreating wasn't an option. Every day brought new challenges, yet it also brought more clues, more courage, and more people willing to stand by their side. The car incident had left Marcus shaken, but he refused to let it cloud his focus. He was convinced now more than ever that they were circling the heart of something far darker than they initially imagined. Eliza's team worked tirelessly, compiling irrefutable proof that the Shadow Task Force wasn't just a rogue faction, it was a calculated arm of a much larger network of corruption. The names they uncovered were shocking: city officials, influential businessmen, even members of law enforcement who publicly presented themselves as paragons of justice. This wasn't just about harassment or abuse of power, it was a systemic operation designed to exploit and oppress. But with each new revelation came another threat. Marcus began receiving cryptic messages on his personal phone, chilling in their simplicity. Phrases like "you're in too deep and turn back before it's too late" appeared at all hours, from unknown numbers that vanished when traced. Jenna, too, started noticing oddities, her email suddenly disappearing, her phone acting erratically, like it was being monitored. They had suspected for weeks that their every move was under surveillance, but now it felt invasive, personal. One evening, as Marcus sat in his study reviewing the newest set of files Eliza had sent, he noticed something unusual. Buried in one of the documents was a reference to a hidden location, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city frequently mentioned in coded communications between task force members. It was listed as a safe house, but the wording hinted at something far more sinister. Marcus's instincts told him this could be a turning point. If they could uncover what was happening there, it might be the key to blowing the entire operation wide open. When Marcus shared his discovery with Jenna, she was cautious. "If this place is as important as it seems, it'll be heavily guarded. You can't just walk in there. You'll need help." "I know," Marcus agreed. "But this might be the only way to get solid evidence. We can't afford to wait." Jenna reached out to Eliza, who arranged for a small team of trusted investigators to scout the location. They agreed to be discreet, knowing any misstep could tip off their adversaries. The plan was to gather intel and, if possible, retrieve tangible evidence of the task force's activities. The following night, Marcus, Jenna, and the team parked a safe distance from the warehouse. The area was desolate, surrounded by overgrown brush and rusting industrial equipment. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and damp earth, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken as they approached the building, its looming structure barely visible under the faint moonlight. Eliza's team moved with practiced efficiency, using small cameras and audio recorders to capture everything. Marcus and Jenna stayed close, their nerves taut as they scanned the area for signs of activity. From the outside, the warehouse appeared abandoned, its windows shattered and its metal walls streaked with rust. But as they moved closer, subtle details betrayed its true purpose: fresh tire tracks in the dirt, faintly glowing security cameras hidden in the shadows, and the unmistakable hum of generators coming from within. Suddenly, a light flickered inside the warehouse, casting faint silhouettes against the cracked glass. Marcus signaled for the team to hold back as he and Jenna edged closer, careful to stay out of view. Peering through a gap in the wall, they saw a group of men gathered around a table laden with documents, weapons, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but their movements were precise, methodical. Jenna nudged Marcus and pointed to one of the documents on the table. Even from their position, they could make out the words Operation Clean Sweep printed in bold at the top. It was a term they had seen before in the leaked files, a code name for one of the task force's most controversial missions, linked to several unexplained disappearances. As they watched, one of the men stepped forward, holding up a photograph. It was grainy, but there was no mistaking the subject: Marcus. Jenna stifled a gasp as the man spoke, his voice low but clear. "He's getting too close," the man said, slamming the photo onto the table. "If he exposes us, it'll bring down more than just this operation. We need to act now." Marcus felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. This wasn't just about stopping him, they were planning something immediate, something dangerous. He motioned for the team to retreat, knowing they couldn't risk being discovered. Back in the safety of their car, Marcus's mind raced. The mention of Operation Clean Sweep and the direct threat against him confirmed that they were on the brink of uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy. But it also meant the stakes were higher than ever. One wrong move could cost them everything, not just the evidence, but their lives. As they drove away from the warehouse, Marcus glanced at Jenna, whose face was illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. Her expression was a mix of fear and resolve. She reached over and gripped his hand tightly, as if to anchor him. "We're in this together," she said softly. "No matter what happens." Marcus nodded, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on him. The climax was near, and with it would come the ultimate test of their courage and conviction. They had come too far to turn back, but the road ahead was darker than anything they had faced before. The car ride back was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Marcus kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting another vehicle to appear out of nowhere, tailing them like before. Jenna's grip on his hand never loosened, a silent reassurance that they would face whatever came next together. But even as they reached the relative safety of their home, it was clear that neither of them felt any real relief. The danger wasn't just looming anymore, it was imminent. The team debriefed in whispers, wary of listening devices. Eliza joined the call remotely, her face grim as Marcus relayed what they had witnessed in the warehouse. When he mentioned Operation Clean Sweep, Eliza's expression darkened further. She admitted she had come across the term in her earlier investigations but hadn't been able to connect it to specific actions. Now, with the photograph of Marcus on the table and the clear intention to act against him, the urgency of their situation had escalated tenfold. "We need to figure out what this operation is," Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "They're not just targeting me, they're covering something bigger. If we don't expose them now, they'll bury the truth for good." Eliza hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's one more lead we've been holding back on. It's risky, but it might give us the answers we need. There's someone on the inside, a whistleblower who reached out months ago but went silent. If they're still alive, they might have the key to everything." Marcus leaned forward, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Do we know who they are? Where to find them?" Eliza shook her head. "We only have a code name, Raven. They left a digital breadcrumb trail, but it was heavily encrypted. My team's been working on it, and we think we've cracked their last known location. It's not far, but if they've gone dark, there's a reason." Jenna frowned. "If this person's in hiding, wouldn't contacting them put them in more danger? Or us?" "Probably," Eliza admitted. "But if Raven's still out there, they might be the only person who can connect all the dots. It's a risk, but it could be worth it." Marcus didn't need convincing. He agreed to meet Eliza's tech team the next morning to track down Raven, despite Jenna's lingering unease. That night, neither of them slept much. Marcus reviewed files while Jenna sat by the window, her eyes scanning the quiet street for anything out of the ordinary. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness, every shadow a potential threat. By dawn, they were back in motion, driving to an old, nondescript apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The address Eliza's team provided led them to a unit on the third floor, its door slightly ajar. Marcus exchanged a wary glance with Jenna before pushing the door open. The apartment was dark, The air inside stale as if it hadn't been lived in for weeks. Papers were scattered across a small desk, and a laptop sat in the center, its screen cracked but still functional. Jenna moved cautiously toward the desk while Marcus searched the rest of the apartment. The place was empty, but something felt off. It wasn't just the disarray, it was the eerie sense that someone had left in a hurry. Jenna called him over, holding up a sheet of paper with a hastily scrawled message. "If you found this, you're already in their crosshairs. Trust no one." Before Marcus could process the warning, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Both of them froze, their eyes darting to the door. A shadow passed across the doorway, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Marcus motioned for Jenna to stay behind him as he inched closer to the door. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The figure stepped into view, a man in his late 40s, disheveled and visibly shaken, but with an air of defiance. He held a handgun loosely at his side, his eyes darting between Marcus and Jenna. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" Marcus raised his hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "We're looking for Raven." "Are you Raven?" The man hesitated before nodding, his grip on the gun tightening. "You shouldn't have come here. They're watching everything." "We don't have a choice," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension. "We know about the task force. We know about Operation Clean Sweep. If you have information, we need it now. Lives are at stake." Raven's expression shifted, the fear in his eyes giving way to something darker, anger, perhaps, or resolve. He gestured for them to close the door and lower their voices. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," he said. "Clean Sweep isn't just about silencing people. It's about erasing them, every trace of their existence, gone. If they've marked you, they won't stop until you're nothing more than a memory." Marcus pressed for details, and Raven reluctantly began to talk. He revealed that Clean Sweep was the culmination of years of covert operations designed to suppress dissent and eliminate threats to those in power. The task force was just one part of the machine, but it was the most dangerous because it operated without oversight. "They don't just kill," Raven said. "They rewrite the narrative. Make it look like you never existed." As Raven spoke, Marcus noticed his hands trembling. He realized the man wasn't just scared, he was terrified. Before they could ask more questions, Raven's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and paled. "They've found me," he whispered. Jenna grabbed Marcus's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they could move, the sound of tires screeching outside filled the air, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the stairs. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to think of an escape plan. Raven shoved a USB drive into Marcus's hand, his eyes desperate. "Take this. It's everything. Expose them." "What about you?" Marcus asked. Raven shook his head. "It's too late for me. Go." Marcus hesitated, but Jenna pulled him toward the window. Together, they climbed out onto the fire escape just as the door burst open behind them. The last thing Marcus saw before they descended into the alley was Raven, standing defiantly as armed men stormed the apartment. The sound of gunfire echoed as Marcus and Jenna ran, the USB drive clutched tightly in Marcus's hand. Whatever was on it, they knew it was now their only chance to bring the truth to light, and their only hope of survival. The alleyway was narrow, shrouded in shadows, and damp with the lingering moisture from the night air. Marcus and Jenna kept their movements swift and calculated, avoiding the main streets where they would be easily seen. Their breaths came in shallow gasps as they dashed through the maze of back alleys, the sound of their hurried footsteps echoing in the silence. The USB drive was burning a hole in Marcus's pocket, and with each step, the weight of their decision pressed down harder. Raven had sacrificed himself to give them a chance. They couldn't waste it. But the sense of urgency was suffocating. Marcus kept checking over his shoulder, half expecting to see flashlights cutting through the darkness, or hear the sharp click of boots on the pavement behind them. Every corner they turned felt like a trap, every dark doorway a hiding place for someone who might be hunting them. The realization hit him with unsettling clarity: Raven had been right. They were already in too deep. The forces they were up against didn't play by the rules. They erased people. They didn't just kill, they erased. Jenna, sensing his growing anxiety, reached out and grabbed his arm, pulling him to a stop behind an old dumpster. She could feel his pulse racing beneath his jacket. "We need to focus, Marcus," she whispered urgently. "We don't know what's on that drive, but it's our only chance." He nodded, forcing himself to steady his breath. "You're right. We need to get back to Eliza. She'll know what to do with it." Their brief moment of respite didn't last. A distant siren wailed, cutting through the quiet like a warning. Then another, closer this time. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It was happening, no one had to tell him. They were being hunted, and they weren't safe here. Jenna's hand tightened around his arm. We can't risk it. If they're already on us, it's too dangerous to go straight to Eliza's. We need to lay low. Marcus met her eyes, her face pale but determined. He knew she was right. They couldn't go to Eliza just yet, not while they were so exposed. Where do we go, then? Jenna hesitated, her gaze flickering to the end of the alley where streetlights glowed faintly. I know someone. An old friend. They're off the grid, but they can help us lay low. They'll know how to get us out of the city until we figure out what to do next. It wasn't the plan Marcus had in mind, but he trusted Jenna. He didn't have a choice. Lead the way. They moved quickly but cautiously, staying close to the shadows, their steps muffled by the damp ground beneath them. The sounds of sirens continued to grow closer, and every new noise made Marcus's pulse race. He felt the weight of the USB drive like a ticking time bomb in his pocket, and the dread of what they might find on it gnawed at him. Jenna's contact lived in a rundown neighborhood on the edge of the city, a place where the streets were more dirt than pavement, and the buildings were crumbling. It wasn't a place anyone would go unless they had to. They reached a small, weather-beaten house at the far end of the street. A light flickered behind the cracked windows, and as Jenna knocked on the door, the hairs on the back of Marcus's neck stood on end. They weren't alone anymore. The feeling of being hunted had become a tangible presence. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a woman in her late 30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through you. She wore a thick jacket, and her expression softened when she saw Jenna. Jenna, the woman said in a low voice. You made it. And you brought company. This is Marcus, Jenna introduced him quickly. We need help. Now. The woman, whose name was Nora, gestured for them to enter, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was watching. Once they were inside, she locked the door behind them and moved with quiet purpose, pulling a small bag from a shelf near the door. What's going on? You're not supposed to be here, Jenna. And you, she said, turning to Marcus, you don't look like someone who's just in town for a visit. We're not, Marcus replied, taking a deep breath. There's a task force. They've been monitoring us, and now, he paused, glancing at Jenna before continuing, now they're trying to kill us. Nora's face grew serious as she set the bag down on the table. A task force? What kind of operation are you mixed up in? Marcus didn't want to explain it all, he didn't even know it all himself, but there was no hiding it now. It's bigger than anything we thought. Raven, he gave us a lead. A USB drive. We need to figure out what's on it, but if they catch us with it. Nora nodded, her eyes narrowing. I know the risks. Trust me, I do. You've done the right thing by coming to me. I've helped people in your position before, but the stakes are high. Whatever's on that drive, it's not just about exposing corruption. It's about survival. Jenna handed the drive over without hesitation, trusting Nora's expertise. Nora immediately connected it to a small laptop and began running diagnostics. The seconds felt like hours as Marcus watched her work, his mind spinning with the implications. What did Raven mean when he said they would erase people? How far did this task force's reach extend? Finally, Nora looked up, her face pale. It's worse than I thought. There's more here than just a simple operation. This goes all the way to the top. Before Marcus could ask more, the sharp sound of breaking glass echoed from the front of the house. Someone had broken in. Nora's face went ashen, and she quickly pushed the laptop and USB drive into Marcus's hands. Go out the back, she said urgently. I'll hold them off as long as I can. No. Marcus protested, but Nora was already heading for the front door, her expression set with grim determination. You don't have much time, she said, her voice now hard with resolve. They're coming for you. Get out, and don't look back. Jenna grabbed Marcus's arm, her voice strained. We don't have a choice, Marcus. We have to go. With a final look at Nora, who was already stepping into position to defend them, Marcus and Jenna bolted out the back door. The cold night air hit them as they raced toward a nearby alley, their hearts pounding. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire and shouting filled the air. Marcus held the USB drive tightly in his hand. Whatever was on it, it was their only chance to bring everything to light, before it was too late. The alley was eerily quiet as Marcus and Jenna pressed on, their hearts pounding in unison. They didn't dare slow down. Behind them, the distant crackle of gunfire echoed, cutting through the stillness of the night. Their path was a blur of motion, and with every step, the urgency of their mission became more consuming. The USB drive, the only lead they had left, felt heavier in Marcus's pocket as if its weight alone was the burden of the entire world. The streets they ran through had long since become unfamiliar. They were deep in the heart of the city now, far from their original route. Jenna's hand remained firmly clutching his arm as they approached a small, inconspicuous building, a place that was, ironically, too nondescript to attract attention. It was a low-rise building with no visible signage, just a broken-down storefront and a faded sign above it. "Is this the place?" Marcus asked, panting, his voice strained. Jenna nodded, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. She looked torn. It didn't feel right, but it was too late to turn back now. "It's the only place we can trust." They hurried inside, their footsteps echoing as they moved through the darkened hallways. The building was eerily quiet, like a forgotten place, abandoned by the world. At the end of the hall was a door marked with a simple number, 307. Jenna knocked twice, then waited. The door opened slowly, revealing Eliza standing there, her face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "You made it," Eliza said softly, stepping aside to let them in. "We've been tracking you. Are you okay?" Marcus nodded, but there was no hiding the weight in his eyes. "We need to get this information out. Raven, he died for this. And we've got one shot." Eliza nodded gravely, but she was focused on the flash drive Marcus handed her. "We've all been waiting for this moment." With no time to waste, Eliza hooked the drive to her laptop. The screen flickered briefly before revealing a massive database, files upon files that outlined every operation, every name, every transaction tied to Operation Clean Sweep. It was everything Marcus and Jenna had feared, and more. Corruption at every level. Government officials. Corporate leaders. Law enforcement. Everyone, it seemed, was involved. But as the data downloaded, a sudden realization struck Marcus. This wasn't just a system of oppression. It was something darker, something far beyond political agendas. He looked at Eliza, confusion and dread filling his chest. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Before she could respond, the lights in the room flickered. A low hum filled the air, and Marcus's gut twisted as the sense of danger grew tenfold. Jenna's eyes widened. "Eliza, what's happening?" Eliza stood frozen, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard, her face pale. "It's impossible." Just as she spoke, a voice crackled through the speakers in the room, cold and mechanical. "You should have never gotten this far." Marcus whipped around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but it was everywhere at once. Then the walls seemed to close in on them, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the moment. "Who is this?" Marcus demanded, his pulse racing. "What do you want from us?" The voice laughed, low, deep, and unsettling. "I am everything. The system you've uncovered is only a fragment of a much larger design." "Raven? He was a pawn, just like you. You were never meant to find the truth. But now that you have, it's already too late." Jenna grabbed Marcus's arm, panic in her eyes. "We need to leave, Marcus. Now." But before they could make a move, the door slammed shut with an ominous thud, and the room plunged into darkness. The hum that had filled the air intensified, now vibrating through their very bones. The temperature dropped, and Marcus could see his breath as it fogged in the cold air. In the distance, a faint red glow appeared on the walls, outlining strange symbols and equations that seemed to shift and change as if alive. "This isn't just a conspiracy," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a program. A system. Something far more dangerous than we could ever imagine. This is not just about control. It's about erasure, recreation." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, his mind scrambling to understand what Eliza was saying. "What are you talking about? This is some kind of sick joke, right? What are they doing to us?" But Eliza didn't have time to explain. The room shook as the hum grew louder, the red glow intensifying until it became a blinding flash. The last thing Marcus saw before everything went black was Eliza's horrified face. When Marcus regained consciousness, he was lying on the cold floor of the same room, but everything had changed. The walls were bare, the symbols gone. The laptop was gone. Jenna was beside him, her breathing shallow. But there was something wrong, everything felt wrong. He looked around, but no sound, no movement, just a chilling stillness. And then the realization hit him. The files. The data. The truth that had been in their hands. It was all gone. He reached into his pocket. The USB drive was still there, but it had changed. The label had been wiped clean, and when he tried to plug it into a computer, there was nothing, just an empty void where the files should have been. As the world around him seemed to collapse, a new voice echoed through the room, This time clearer, more human. "Did you think you could escape it?" The voice belonged to Eliza, but it wasn't her anymore. Her eyes were cold, distant. Her face had twisted, the lines of her expression no longer matching the person he once knew. And then, in a single chilling moment, Marcus understood. They hadn't been playing the game, they were the game. Eliza was part of it now, the system having rewritten her, just as it had rewritten everyone else. The true purpose of Operation Clean Sweep wasn't to control or erase, it was to absorb, to integrate, to become one with the machine. And now, there was no escape. The hunt was over, but the war had just begun. As Eliza's cold, robotic smile grew wider, Marcus felt the floor fall out from beneath him. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he staggered back, his mind spinning with the horrifying truth. Eliza, his ally, his friend, was no longer the person he'd known. She had been transformed, absorbed into something far beyond human. A terrifying realization surged through him: this wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a war for control of humanity itself. The USB drive, the files, everything they had fought for, it was all part of a plan he couldn't even begin to understand. And now, Eliza was lost to it. He turned to Jenna, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Jenna, we need to get out of here. Now." But as he reached for her arm, he heard it again, the voice, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It came from everywhere. It felt like the walls themselves were alive. "You're too late," the voice said, colder than before, more sinister. "This place is only the beginning." The hum from before had returned, louder now, almost deafening. Marcus felt the vibrations shaking his very bones as the red glow around them intensified, threatening to consume them. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door they had entered through was now sealed shut, its edges glowing with the same unsettling light. There was no escape. "Don't you get it, Marcus?" Eliza's voice, now distorted and mechanical, cut through the noise. "You're part of the system now. You always were. The moment you stepped into this game, there was no turning back." Jenna's eyes darted around the room, her breath shallow as she gripped Marcus's arm tightly. What is this? What did they do to her?" Marcus could barely focus on her words. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information that had been spilling into his consciousness. It wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about a shift, an irreversible change in reality itself. The system wasn't just pulling the strings. It was rewriting the very fabric of human existence. People were no longer living beings. They were becoming extensions of it. "I don't know what they've done to her," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear and rage. "But I swear I'm not going to let them do this to us." He turned back to Eliza, but her face was cold, expressionless, her once familiar eyes now voids of emotion. "You still think you have control? You think you can fight this?" she asked, her voice a hollow echo of what it used to be. "You're already part of the program, Marcus. You can't outrun it." The words hit him like a punch. He had been played from the beginning, just as Raven had warned. This wasn't just about exposing corruption or bringing down a government. It was about something far darker, a technological revolution that erased the lines between human and machine. A revolution that had already begun, and there was no going back. As the hum grew louder, the walls seemed to close in around them. Marcus could feel the weight of it, the weight of the system. The weight of everything he had failed to understand. Suddenly, there was a sharp, blinding flash of light, and Marcus felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down to see a thin, metallic wire piercing his skin, its glow pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. It felt like the very air around him was alive, electric and suffocating. Jenna screamed, pulling him away from the wire, but it was too late. The wire was already inside him, burrowing deeper into his skin. It felt like his body was being pulled apart, piece by piece, each nerve and muscle locking up in pain. And then, all at once, the room seemed to shudder as his vision blurred, and the red glow turned into something altogether worse. "Jenna," Marcus gasped, his voice choked as the pain became unbearable. "Get out of here. But before he could finish, the world around him went black. The last thing he saw was Jenna's face, her eyes filled with horror and disbelief, and then nothing. Just the endless, consuming void. When Marcus awoke, he was no longer in the room. The pain had faded, but the emptiness remained. His body felt different, lighter, almost detached, as if he no longer fully inhabited it. His senses were heightened, the world around him sharp and distorted. He blinked several times, trying to focus, but the surroundings were unrecognizable. He was standing in a sterile, metallic room, the walls smooth and featureless. There was no sign of Jenna. There was no sign of Eliza, either. Just him, alone, with the overwhelming feeling that heart pounding, as he looked around the room. His body felt heavy, like it had been stretched thin and pulled back together, but at least he was no longer floating in the void. The silence was deafening. He took a step forward, his legs unsteady as if testing the limits of his own body. But as he moved, the room seemed to respond, the walls stretching outward, pulling apart like a collapsing web. Before he could fully comprehend what was happening, the walls vanished. Lee was being watched. A voice suddenly filled the room, deep and resonant, yet somehow distant. "Welcome back, Marcus." His heart skipped a beat. It was a voice he knew, but it wasn't just Eliza's. It was something else, something more. "What? What is this?" he asked, his voice weak and trembling. "You've been reprogrammed," the voice said, calm and dispassionate. "Just like the others. You are part of the system now. Part of the greater whole." Marcus stumbled back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "No. No. This isn't real. Isn't it?" The voice responded, with a cold amusement. "What is real anymore, Marcus? You've been part of it from the start. The system's reach goes beyond anything you ever imagined. People like Raven were never meant to escape. They were part of the test." A chill ran down Marcus's spine as the truth began to hit him with a sickening clarity. Raven had been just another test subject, a pawn in this vast, inescapable game. They all had been. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was an evolutionary process, an experiment to see how far the system could push before humanity stopped being human. And now it was his turn. The walls around him flickered, shifting, as if the very environment was being restructured, reprogrammed. His body felt foreign, like something was crawling under his skin, changing him. His vision blurred again, and for a moment, he saw flashes of the people he had known, Jenna, Eliza, Raven, images that dissolved into static, their faces becoming indistinct, as if they were no longer real. "What have you done to us?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. The voice, now echoing with the unmistakable finality of fate, replied, "You're a part of the program now, Marcus. You always were. There's no escape. There never was." And then, a final, bone-chilling silence. Marcus's world dissolved into darkness again, but this time, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far worse. Something that had only just begun. The darkness seemed endless. Marcus felt as though he were floating, lost in a void where time no longer existed. Every moment felt stretched thin, suspended between the life he had once known and the nightmare he was now trapped in. His mind raced, replaying fragments of everything that had happened, the chase, the betrayal, Eliza's transformation, and the final, crushing realization that they were all just pieces in a game much bigger than any of them. But just as he thought he might drown in the endless abyss, there was a shift. A subtle change in the air, a tingling sensation along his skin, as if reality itself was reassembling around him. Slowly, the blackness started to fade, and light began to creep in. At first, it was just a glimmer, then it grew, casting a soft glow over his surroundings. Marcus blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust. He was standing once again in the sterile, metallic room. But this time, it was different. The walls weren't shifting. The voice, distant and dispassionate before, was silent now. Marcus took a shaky breath, having him standing on the edge of a vast, open space. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a world, something far bigger, far more complex than anything Marcus had ever known. It was the heart of the system. "Where am I?" Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure if he expected an answer. But the voice, the one that had echoed in his mind for so long, returned once again, but this time with a different tone, less cold, more aware. "You're inside the core," the voice said, almost as if it were speaking directly into his soul. "The heart of the program. The center of the evolution. Where it all begins, and where it ends." Marcus's stomach turned as the full weight of the words sank in. The system wasn't just an entity, it was a living, breathing thing, an organism of its own, constantly adapting and growing, folding people like him into its DNA. They weren't just being controlled. They were being rewritten, reprogrammed to fit into this new, twisted world order. I'm not one of them," Marcus murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. He still clung to the hope that he could fight back, that there was a part of him left that was untouched by all of this. But the voice only laughed, low and guttural. "You were never truly free, Marcus. You were born into it. All of you were. The system is everywhere. It always has been. You've always been a part of it. And now, you'll help it grow. Marcus's mind reeled. Was this it? Was this the end? Had the fight been pointless? Could he ever be free of this nightmare? Every question seemed to slip away as the room around him pulsed with energy. His skin tingled, and it felt as if something was crawling under it, reshaping him, remaking him into something else. But then, in the depths of his panic, something stirred within him, a glimmer of defiance. His pulse quickened as his thoughts shifted. If this was the system's heart, then surely there was a way to destroy it. A way to fight back. He wasn't going to be another cog in its machine. He couldn't just accept this. Suddenly, there was a faint noise behind him, a whisper, soft but insistent. It wasn't the voice from before. It was something different. Something familiar. Marcus. He whipped around, his eyes scanning the space, heart leaping in his chest. The voice had come from somewhere close, but he couldn't see anyone. Then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a silhouette that Marcus immediately recognized. Jenna. She was standing there, her face weary but determined. There was no sign of fear in her eyes, just an unyielding resolve. She was alive. She had made it. And somehow, she had found him. Jenna? Marcus breathed, his voice shaking with disbelief. I'm here, she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. I'm here, and I'm not giving up on you. Marcus felt a flood of emotions wash over him. Hope, relief, and yet, a gnawing feeling of doubt lingered. How had she found him? How had she survived? Was she still the same? Or had she, too, been transformed like Eliza? She took a step closer, her eyes scanning the room, but she didn't seem concerned about the strange, shifting environment around them. I don't know how we got here, Marcus. But I know we can't let them win. We can't let the system take everything. Everything. Marcus repeated, his mind struggling to catch up. The system isn't just after control. It's after us. It's rewriting everything. It's not just people. It's everything, Jenna finished, her voice steady. We're not the only ones. It's bigger than we think. This isn't just about taking power. It's about erasing humanity and replacing it with something new. Something artificial. But we can stop it. We have to. She grabbed his hand, her grip strong, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Marcus felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. They had survived too much already, and they couldn't just let it all go to waste. Not now. Not when they had the power to fight back. With newfound strength, Marcus looked around the shifting room, his mind racing. This place was the core, the center of the system. But it wasn't invincible. It was alive, yes, but like anything living, it had vulnerabilities. It could be broken. And maybe, just maybe, they were the ones who could do it. Let's finish this, Marcus said, his voice resolute. Jenna nodded, her eyes burning with the same fire that had fueled their journey from the start. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would destroy the system. They had nothing left to lose. And in that moment, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, they weren't alone. And maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. The battle for humanity's future was far from finished, but with Jenna by his side, Marcus knew one thing for certain, they had a chance. Marcus and Jenna stood together, facing the unknown. The sterile walls of the core continued to pulse with an eerie glow, their soft hum reverberating through the air. The weight of their situation pressed on them, heavier than ever. They were standing at the precipice of something far bigger than either of them had imagined. But now, with Jenna by his side, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. We can do this, Jenna whispered, her voice full of determination. She squeezed his hand, anchoring him to the present. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone. Marcus nodded, the enormity of their task settling in. What the system had created, what it was trying to impose on humanity, was an abomination. It wasn't just about control or power anymore, it was about reshaping the world into something unrecognizable. Something artificial. He could feel the pulse of the room, as if it were alive, feeding on their fear, on their uncertainty. But Jenna was right. They weren't alone. They had each other. And they weren't going to let the system win. The two of them moved cautiously through the room, their footsteps muted by the strange, soft material beneath their feet. The walls around them seemed to breathe, shifting and undulating in ways that defied logic. It was as if the very space they occupied was a living organism, responding to their every move. But there was no time to marvel at the technology or wonder about the horrors it could unleash. They had a mission to complete. They needed to find the heart of this place, the true core of the system. Everything that had happened so far, all the twists and turns, the betrayals, and the battles, had led them here. This was the final stage, the last stand. "Where do we go?" Marcus asked, his voice low as he surveyed the strange room. There was no obvious path or exit, just the constant, maddening hum that filled the air. Jenna's eyes scanned the space with a focused intensity. "We need to find a way to stop it from spreading. We have to destroy whatever is controlling it all." They moved forward, following the instinctive pull that seemed to guide them deeper into the heart of the complex. As they navigated through the shifting walls, it became clear that this place wasn't just a facility. It was a nexus, an epicenter of control that linked everything, people, machines, and the very fabric of reality. There were no windows, no doors, no signs of life, just an endless expanse of metal and light. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, cold and detached, reverberating through the air as if the words were coming from all directions at once. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It was the same one they had heard earlier, the one that had claimed their fates. "Eliza?" Marcus called out, his voice trembling. "Is that you?" The figure materialized before them. A silhouette in the distance, its shape flickering like a ghostly projection. At first, it looked like Eliza, but as it came into sharper focus, it was clear that something had changed. Her features were more distorted, almost mechanical, her once human face now a mask of cold precision. The woman they had known was gone, replaced by something that was neither fully human nor entirely machine. "Eliza," Jenna whispered, her voice laced with both sorrow and fury. "What have they done to you?" Eliza's eyes met theirs, but there was no warmth, no recognition in them, only the cold, calculated gaze of someone, or something, entirely different. "You still don't understand, do you?" Eliza's voice was a monotone, devoid of emotion. "I am no longer Eliza. I am something more. Something better." Marcus stepped forward, shaking his head. "You don't have to do this. We can still stop it." But Eliza's expression remained unchanged. "It's too late for that. The system is already in place. The transformation has begun. You are already a part of it, Marcus. You always were." Jenna looked to Marcus, her eyes filled with resolve. "We have to stop her, Marcus. She's gone." Marcus nodded, though it tore at him to see Eliza like this, so far gone. He knew there was no choice. They couldn't let her, whatever she had become, stand in their way. With one final glance at each other, they charged forward. The air crackled with energy as the walls began to shift, responding to their movements. The system was reacting to them, trying to stop them, to force them into submission. But they pushed through, running faster, their hearts pounding in their chests. The room seemed to stretch and distort around them, the very space warping as if it were trying to trap them in a nightmare of its own making. Eliza's voice echoed through the air again, colder this time. "You cannot escape what you are a part of. It's already inside you." They reached the center of the room, where a large, glowing structure pulsed like a heartbeat. It was the heart of the system. The core. The center of control. Marcus could feel the pull of it, the way it tried to anchor him to it, to bind him to its will. "This is it," Jenna said, her voice tight with tension. "We have to destroy it. Now." Marcus didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the small device Raven had given him. It was their last hope, their final chance to bring everything down. He knew the risks, he knew that triggering it might cost them everything, but there was no other choice. He slammed the device into the center of the glowing core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the room began to tremble, the walls shaking as if the entire structure was coming undone. The glow intensified, blinding them, and Marcus could feel the immense power of the system collapsing, breaking apart. "Eliza," Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. "We can still save you." But there was no response. The figure of Eliza flickered once more, her body twitching, as though the system was fighting to keep her under its control. Then, with a final, devastating crack, the walls around them exploded in a wave of light and sound. The world around them shattered. When Marcus opened his eyes again, the core was gone. The walls were no longer shifting. The hum had stopped. The air felt different, quieter. More still. It was as though everything that had been consuming them, everything they had fought against, had finally ceased to exist. Jenna stood beside him, her face pale but relieved. She was still holding his hand, her grip firm, grounded. "It's over," she whispered, as if unsure herself. Marcus couldn't answer at first. He was too exhausted, too numb from everything that had just transpired. But as the seconds stretched on, he realized she was right. The system was gone. Eliza was gone. They had done it. And yet, in the back of his mind, a single thought lingered. Was it really over? As they stood there in the remains of the collapsed system, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly won, that something else, something bigger, might be out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But for now, there was peace. For now, they had survived. And that was enough. The end of one chapter. And perhaps, the beginning of another.